Richard says, information, there are 7 to 9 planets, celestial bodies that are in retrograde. I believe this is causing all the market's uncertainty we're having now. Food for thought. There's a part of me that would agree that that's a super unusual amount of planets being in retrograde. And if we have a moment here, and we may have this, and I know a lot of people hate the planetary thing, and I'm not making a big deal about it here, but I do want to just describe, so maybe for once and for all, you can see what that looks like. And this is just on the spot. You have this, we're going to have to make the solar system a circle for today, okay? I mean, a square for today. So just tolerate me for this. Let's put a square up and just imagine that this is the solar system really quick. And here's the sun in the center of the solar system. We'll make an X on that sun. So, and then there's all the planets. I'm just going to have to make little dots that are floating around, at their various orbits from the sun. Let's say this was the third planet from the sun. That's Earth. From the perspective of the Earth, this planet, when you're looking at this planet, because the Earth is in motion around the sun, and so is this planet, both these bodies are moving not at the same rate, but they're moving. Both bodies are moving. So you're an observer on a moving body, observing another moving body at a different speed. At a certain point in all of this going around and round, the distance between you and that other planet gets larger and smaller, and by large degrees. At some point, your viewpoint of this planet, somewhere in this rotation, I can't really, I can't make it happen here. It's going to look to you, because your speed is now going faster than the speed of that planet, because you're closer to the sun and it's further away. And it's a magical illusion. At some point, your observation of this planet, as you're going faster around this curve, this planet's going slower, it's going to look to you from this moving object, that this moving object is now moving backwards. It's moving backwards visually, but in fact, not at all. It's only an optical illusion. And that optical illusion is caused in part by your speed being greater than the speed of this planet for a period of time at a particular juncture in that whole cycle, the circle. So this planet goes backwards, and while that illusion exists, that period of time that illusion exists is called the retrograde period. So the planet appears to be moving forward and suddenly stops and moves backwards. It's a complete illusion. While that planet is moving backwards, that's called the retrograde period. That's when it goes into retrograde. And then at some point, your motion moves far enough away and around the curve where now the planet appears to go back into normal motion. And that is when what's called going direct. So the planet can go from normal to retrograde, and that period lasts a certain period of time, and then it goes forward again and continues its loop around our square orbit here, right? It continues to go around. I can't really draw that to show you, but this period is retrograde from the start of the illusion to the end of the illusion where it goes direct. That period is known as retrograde. So why would that have anything to do at all with anything that happens on Earth? Well, I'm not capable of actually answering that question, but in classical astrology, retrograde motion means that success and forward movement in a person's life or in the life of a country or an entity of any kind will experience a backslide, or backslide is kind of a Christian term. I don't mean it in that way. I mean more like things that were progressing go backwards for a little bit. You're not having, or between a relationship between two people, maybe they're not getting along as well during the retrograde period, and then the direct comes, and then things go back to normal. That's a really basic explanation for that. I don't mind telling you my discovery, which is that the planet Mercury, when it goes retrograde, and the planet Mercury is a pretty fast planet with a 90-day cycle. It goes retrograde 4 times a year. Now, you can look this up in a book called an ephemeris, which is a calendar basically for planetary movement. Ephemeris, Ephemeris. So an ephemeris shows you what the planetary positions are. I have seen, and I do follow this is part of my work, that if I see Mercury going into retrograde on a specific date, and if other technical considerations are in alignment, I expect dramatically increased volatility in the retrograde period, which occurs approximately 4 times a year. The planet Jupiter is often considered the money planet, if I'm remembering correctly. And the planet Jupiter is really obnoxiously huge. It's so huge that it might be able to hold something like 1,300 Earths. So you really have to get your mind together to understand how big the planet Jupiter is. You know, we live at a certain scale here, and these scales are so outside of our normal daily scales, it's hard to fathom. So there's 1,300 Earths can fit into Jupiter. If at the same time and Jupiter goes retrograde once a year. So when Richard's talking about a bunch of planets being retrograde, that is an unusual condition, because Jupiter's only going to go retrograde once in a year. One other set of conditions that I will follow is when Jupiter is in retrograde and Mercury has a retrograde inside of the Jupiter retrograde, which I think is about 3 months. So pretty much you're going to get a Mercury inside of the Jupiter. So what am I doing with that information? I'm basically first leaning on, I put everything in the right order. Planets are not the first thing. For me, they're not. But the technicals from the market are. And then if it looks like things could get big and things are going to move and there's an indication for a big move, and I have a Mercury retrograde or something coming up on a specific date that leads into the date I'm looking for, that's a really big deal. I take advantage of that. And I will forecast a larger move than normal and or faster than normal based on the retrograde of Mercury. Now, every planet except the sun, here's the sun, can go, actually, technically the sun can actually do a retrograde, but it's really a nuanced thing. But because the sun is the center, it never gets in position to do this illusion on its own. The sun doesn't literally go into a retrograde period. But all of the planets that surround the sun and are moving can, at some point in their cycle, get into retrograde because they're all moving at different speeds. They're all moving at different distances from each other. They're all moving in the same direction, and the retrograde illusion is going to take place. So yes, there's a Saturn, there's a Uranus, there's all these other planets that will go into retrograde. But they're all based upon, like in our case, Earth, the geocentric, meaning you're on Earth viewing other planets. That viewpoint is the only one. If you were on Saturn looking at Earth, you would see the Earth go into retrograde. In the same way that from Earth, we can see the Saturn go into retrograde. So I hope that explains the retrograde function. I studied astrology for a while, and I'm just not smart enough. I mean, just clean cut. I just don't have all of it put together correctly to really put it together. And I found myself more attracted to the technicals of the market itself, partly with the basis that the market itself is probably going to say something about itself. You know, even though planets may very well have a oscillating effect or something on the Earth, or they may just signal something, like a church bell signaling that people are going to go to church, but doesn't actually cause those people to go to church. It just signals it. Why the planets would do that, I don't have an answer. But some people believe that the planets put out, and they do. They're moving forces through time and space, and they are warping time and space. I mean, Jesus. Something the size of 1,300 Earths, when it's moving through time and space, it's warping time and space. Ain't no two ways about it. So that's energy. Energy is being put in motion, and that's moving around the Earth. So it's quite possible that there's all kinds of fields of force that are in place around planets and from planets, and as they interact with each other, just like waves interacting with each other in pools. So the thing that attracts me to planets is that there are forces at work there. And that's my most basic thing. So I don't have the skills that Richard does with astrology. I have looked at it. There are some really interesting things and very, very interesting ideas. But I think I needed a closer, more direct connection, and wanted to see if I could find something in markets. But someday, and maybe sooner rather than later, I may want to go back to review with maybe a more sober mind, now that I've made some accomplishment in the technicals, to again take another look.